She didn't hesitate when the blade touched her skin. Cold steel. One breath held too long. Then the first lock of hair fell into the sink, dark and heavy, like a piece of the life she was leaving behind. Another cut. Another. The woman staring back from the mirror looked thinner somehow. Sharper. Free in a way Eleanor Whitmore had never been allowed to be. She pressed her lips together, steadying her hands, and finished the job. Hair lay scattered across the marble floor like evidence of a crime. She didn't clean it up. She didn't need to. At 23 years old, Eleanor slipped out of the only home she'd ever known without waking a soul. The Whitmore estate slept behind her. Crystal chandeliers dimmed. Persian rugs hushed her steps. Every inch of the place smelled of money and rules and quiet threats. She carried a canvas bag over her shoulder. Inside it were a servant's dress, wool stockings, worn boots taken from the back stairs. Nothing she owned. Everything she needed. At the bottom of the bag was the reason she was leaving. A folded newspaper clipping. 2 years old. Yellowed at the edges. She'd memorized every word. Local rancher rescues traveler from blizzard. Survivor unnamed. Her father had paid well to make sure that story went no further. Paid the editor. Paid the doctor. Paid the men who brought her home half dead and silent. He'd called it protection. Eleanor called it erasure. She remembered the storm. White swallowing the world. Hands pulling her up when she couldn't feel her legs anymore. A rough voice had cut through the wind. Calm. Unyielding. Don't you die on me. Not tonight. She remembered waking in a small cabin, a fire popping, bandages tight around her shoulder, a man with tired eyes feeding her broth, asking nothing, not her name, not where she came from, just whether she could swallow. 3 days he kept her alive. On the 4th, her father's men came. She'd been too weak to fight them, too fevered to speak. But she heard her father in the hallway, voice low and sharp. Never mention this again. Associating with frontier trash ruins her prospects. The scar on her shoulder burned as if it remembered too. Eleanor stopped at the edge of the drive. The mansion glowed behind her, all gaslight and false warmth. She pulled out the clipping, struck a match, and watched the paper curl and blacken. When it was ash, she let it scatter in the wind. She wrote one sentence on her father's stationery and left it on the hall table. I'm going to find what you tried to bury. The cold before dawn bit her face as she walked away. She didn't look back. The train carried her west, farther with every mile. She bought her ticket with money taken from her father's desk. The clerk barely glanced at her. That was the point. By the time the supply wagon dropped her at the edge of nowhere, Eleanor Whitmore no longer existed. The ranch did. It looked smaller than it had in her memories, weather-beaten, tired. A fence post leaned crooked. The barn door hung off one hinge. The cabin had an unfinished addition on its east side, half-framed and wrapped in torn canvas that snapped in the wind. And there he was, a man working alone in the field, broad shoulders, worn hat pulled low. He drove fence posts into frozen ground with a steady rhythm, like someone who didn't know how to stop moving. Her throat tightened. She forced herself forward. Mud sucked at her boots. When she reached him, he didn't look up. I'm looking for work, she said. Her voice surprised her. Steady. Plain. He paused, finally looked at her. Storm-gray eyes. Deep lines at the corners. A face shaped by wind and loss. Can you work? He asked. Or are you running from something? She swallowed. Both. Something flickered in his expression, almost a smile. Name? She hesitated just long enough to hurt. Lillian Hale. Orphan. The lie tasted like copper. I heard you might need help. He studied her in silence, then nodded once. Daniel Mercer. This is my land. He gestured with the hammer. It's not much. I can offer the barn. 1 meal a day. No pay until you prove yourself. I can prove myself. He handed her an axe and pointed to a pile of logs. Split that cord. Her hands blistered within 10 swings. By 20, blood seeped through her palms. She didn't stop. Her arms shook. Her breath burned. She split every log. When she finished, she set the axe down and met his gaze. He nodded. Barn's yours. Supper's at sundown. That evening, he cooked stew over the iron stove. She stood outside the cabin window watching him move through the space. Same table, same chair, same place she'd woken 2 years ago, saved. He stepped onto the porch. "You coming in or not?" She followed him inside, sat across from him. Tin bowls scraped the table. Their fingers brushed when he handed her a spoon. He froze, his eyes dropped to her hand, lingered. "Something wrong?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, thought I recognized something." They ate in silence. Potatoes, carrots, salted pork. It tasted like forgiveness. That night, curled in the hay, she wept quietly. He didn't remember her face, but his hands did. She'd seen it in that pause. She pressed her bleeding palms together and stared at the rafters. "He saved my life," she thought, "and I'm lying to him." Outside, the wind howled. Winter wasn't finished yet. Neither was the truth. Lillian Hale learned the shape of the days by pain. Morning came with stiffness in her shoulders and the raw burn in her palms. She woke before the sun, before Daniel Mercer stirred in the cabin. The barn smelled of hay and old leather. She pulled on borrowed clothes and worked until her arms felt steady again. She hauled water from the creek, mucked stalls until her back ached, mended tack with fingers that trembled less each day. Daniel watched without comment. Not closely, not kindly, just enough to measure whether she would quit. She didn't. By the third morning, he handed her a shovel without a word and nodded toward the fence line. She worked beside him in silence. Mud clung to her boots. The thaw had begun. Snow melted into thick brown soup that swallowed everything slow enough to stand still. At noon, he tossed her a piece of bread and salted meat. She caught it, surprised. "Eat," he said. "You'll need it." She did, grateful in a way that tightened her chest. In the evenings, they sat by the fire. Daniel carved fence posts. She stitched harness straps with careful hands. The silence between them stretched, then settled. It wasn't empty. It felt worn in, like a trail walked enough times to trust. "Why do you work alone?" she asked one night. He didn't answer right away. Kept carving. Shavings curled at his feet. "My wife," he said finally, "died 3 winters ago." Her hands stilled. "I was gone, checking trap lines. 4 days. His voice stayed flat. "Came back to a grave I didn't dig." "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded once. "Doesn't change much." It changed everything. She knew that guilt, the kind that never slept, the kind that whispered that surviving was its own kind of crime. "You can't blame yourself," she said quietly. He set the knife down, looked at her. "Can't I?" The fire popped. The answer hung between them, heavy and unanswered. A week passed. Daniel's suspicion softened into something else. Not trust. Not yet. But less doubt. He showed her how to saddle a horse properly, how to set a fence post straight so it wouldn't lean when the ground froze again, how to listen for weather before it showed itself. "You watch the clouds," he said, "but you listen to the wind." She listened. Her thighs ached from riding, her shoulders burned from roping strays. She never complained. One afternoon, the fence along the ravine gave way. A rotten post snapped, and 6 head of cattle bolted toward open ground. Daniel swore and kicked his horse forward. Lillian followed. The world narrowed to pounding hooves and breath tearing from her lungs. She cut ahead of the led steer, waving her hat, shouting until her voice cracked. The animal veered. The others followed. Disaster turned aside by inches. Daniel reined in beside her, chest heaving. "You ride like you were born to it." She forced a smile. "Beginner's luck." He shook his head. That wasn't luck. The question sat in his eyes. "Where'd you learn?" Her stomach dropped. "Here and there," she said. "Odd jobs." He didn't press, but something had shifted. That evening, he showed her how to tie a proper knot. His hands guided hers. Rough palms over blistered skin. The air thickened. Wood smoke. Sweat. Pine and leather. "A good knot," he said softly, "holds when everything else fails." Their eyes met, held. For a moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back. "You're learning fast." "I had a good teacher." He handed her a coat, worn, faded, smelled faintly of lavender. "Winter's not done," he said. She'd want it used. She took it, guilt pressing down like stones. She wore a dead woman's coat while lying to the dead woman's husband. That night, she wrote in a small journal by candlelight, "He doesn't remember my face. But I remember his hands. They were the first kind thing I ever knew." Outside, icicles dripped from the eaves. Spring crept closer, slow and dangerous. Mud season came hard. The ground swallowed wheels. Creeks swelled. Daniel moved the cattle to higher pasture. Lillian rode beside him, steady and quiet. A wagon rattled up the drive one afternoon. A traveling merchant selling supplies. The man tipped his hat. "Afternoon, Mercer." "Josiah," Daniel said. The merchant's eyes landed on Lillian. His smile faltered. "Don't suppose you're from back east?" Quote. Her blood went cold. "No," she said evenly. "Born and raised out here." Josiah squinted. "You look familiar." Daniel stepped forward. "She works for me. You selling or not?" The merchant hesitated, then shook his head. "Just passing through." When the wagon left, Daniel turned to her. "You in trouble, Lillian?" She met his eyes, lied again. Not anymore. He wanted to believe her. She could see it in the way his jaw relaxed. That night, she stared at the barn rafters, listening to the wind. The lie was unraveling thread by thread. She didn't know how to stop it. Late March brought a cold snap. Wolves came down from the hills. Lillian woke to howling. Sharp. Close. She grabbed a torch and ran toward the cabin. Daniel was already outside, rifle in hand. "Stay behind me." They moved toward the livestock pen. Eyes glowed in the dark. 6 shapes circled, testing. Daniel fired once. The pack scattered, then regrouped. One lunged. Everything happened at once. The wolf cleared the fence. The torch fell. Daniel slammed into her, tackling her sideways. Mud exploded as they hit the ground. Teeth snapped where her throat had been. Another shot. A yelp. The pack fled. Lillian lay beneath him, heart hammering. His hand rested on her shoulder. The scar! His thumb pressed into the puckered skin. His breath caught. "I've seen this," he said slowly. "That scar." She couldn't breathe. "You just saved my life," she said quickly. "Maybe that's what you're feeling." He didn't move for a long moment. Then he pulled away. Inside the cabin, he poured coffee. His hands shook. "You scared?" he asked. "Terrified," she said, "of losing this." He looked at her, something softening in his eyes. She stepped outside at dawn. Her handkerchief slipped from her pocket. Daniel found it an hour later. Fine thread, careful stitching. 2 initials, L.H. or something else. He folded it slowly and slipped it into his pocket. And for the first time, he wondered who she really was. Daniel didn't mention the handkerchief. He worked harder that day. Longer. His answer shortened. When Lillian spoke, he nodded without looking at her. The distance between them grew sharp, like frost after thaw. By noon, 2 riders appeared on the road. Lillian was in the barn, brushing down a mare, when Daniel called her name. His voice was tight. She stepped outside. The men sat tall in their saddles, well-dressed, clean boots, hard eyes that measured everything. "Afternoon," the taller one said. "We're looking for a missing woman, dark hair, early 20s. Seen anyone like that?" Daniel didn't answer right away. The man unfolded a paper. "There's a reward." He held it out. $5,000. Lillian's heart stopped. Daniel took the notice, read it slowly. His face drained of color. The description matched her. Every line. At the bottom, a name printed in bold. Eleanor Whitmore. The men tipped their hats. "If you hear anything, tell the sheriff. We'll be back." They rode off. The wind moved through the yard, quiet and cold. Daniel turned to her. "Who are you?" She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. "Who are you?" he asked again, louder. "Your real name." Her hands shook. "Eleanor." The word cracked. Eleanor Whitmore. It was like striking him. He staggered back a step. "You lied," he said. "I had to. You lied to my face. Every day." He crushed the paper in his fist. "Why?" "Because you saved my life," she said, the truth tearing free. 2 years ago, in the blizzard. That was me. You pulled me out of the snow. You kept me alive." His eyes burned. "And my father took me away," she went on. "He buried the story, called you trash, made sure you were never thanked." Daniel laughed once. "Harsh, empty. So this was guilt," he said. "Charity for the poor rancher." "No," she said, stepping closer. "I came because you were the only person who ever saw me as human." He stepped back. "I don't need your money," he said coldly. "I don't need your guilt, and I don't need you." She reached for him. "Get out," he said, pointing toward the road. "Go back to your mansion, to your father, to whatever life you're pretending you don't want." Tears blurred her vision. "That's not why I came." "I don't care." He turned away and slammed the cabin door. Rain began to fall, cold, relentless. She stood in the mud, shaking. Then she walked to the barn. Not to pack. She wasn't leaving. She stayed. She worked alone in the rain, fixed the fence Daniel had neglected, repaired the wagon wheel, finished the cabin addition he'd abandoned after his wife died. Every morning, she hammered boards into place. Every evening, she patched holes in the roof. They didn't speak, but he watched from the window. Fury wrestled with something softer, something he didn't want to name. One night, he opened a trunk he hadn't touched in years. Inside was a journal, his wife's handwriting. Careful, familiar. The last entry was dated days before she died. "If I go, don't let guilt keep you from living again. Let someone in. Promise me." Daniel closed the book and wept. The writers returned at dawn. This time, they brought the sheriff. "We need to search your property," the sheriff said. "We have reason to believe the missing woman is here." Daniel's blood went cold. If they took Eleanor, she'd be dragged back east, locked away, erased again. "She's not here," he said. "Then you won't mind if we look." Daniel stepped in front of the barn door. "I do mind." Hands moved toward guns. From behind the barn, Eleanor appeared, hammer still in her hand. Mud and sawdust streaked across her dress. "I'm here," she said quietly. Daniel turned. "Eleanor, don't." "I won't let you lie for me." She faced the sheriff. "I'm Eleanor Whitmore, and I'm not going back." The investigator smiled thinly. "That's not your choice." "Yes, it is." She set the hammer down. "I'm of age. I've broken no laws. You can't force me." The sheriff hesitated. "My father has no claim on me," she said steadily. "I renounce my inheritance. I renounce my name. This is my home." Daniel stared at her. She turned to him, tears streaking her face. "I know you don't trust me. I know I lied. But I worked. I earned my place. I'm not leaving unless you throw me out yourself." Silence. Then Daniel stepped beside her. "She stays." The sheriff nodded slowly. "No law says we can take her." The riders cursed under their breath and mounted up. As the dust settled, Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Daniel didn't smile. But he didn't walk away, and that was enough, for now. The investigators rode off, leaving ruts in the mud that filled slowly with rain. The sound of hooves faded. The ranch breathed again. Eleanor stood where she was, arms hanging loose, strength draining now that the fight had passed. Daniel didn't look at her. He stared at the road like it might turn back on him. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he answered. His voice was rough. "Doesn't mean I wouldn't." They stood there a long moment. Wind tugged at the canvas on the unfinished edition. A board creaked. Somewhere, a cow lowed, restless. "I meant what I said," Eleanor continued. "About staying." Daniel finally turned. His eyes were tired, older than before. "You also meant the lies," he said. "Both can be true." She nodded. "I know." He walked past her into the barn, the door shut without a slam. That hurt more. Days followed, quiet ones. Daniel didn't send her away. He didn't invite her closer either, They worked side by side with careful distance, like two people sharing a narrow bridge. Necessary, tense, passable. Eleanor finished the addition, framed the window, hung the door. When she stepped back, the cabin looked whole again, like someone had finally stayed. Daniel noticed. He didn't comment. One evening, he brought 2 plates out to the porch, set one beside her without a word. They ate as the sun slid down behind the hills. The silence was different now. Not angry, just wounded. After supper, he spoke. "My wife's name was Margaret," he said. Eleanor looked up, surprised. "She hated unfinished things," he went on. "Said they felt like promises you were breaking." Eleanor swallowed. She would have liked the addition. He nodded. She would have. That night, Eleanor slept without crying for the first time since she'd arrived. The next morning, a black carriage rolled up the drive. Eleanor knew it before she saw it. The air changed, tightened. Daniel stepped out of the barn as the carriage stopped. 2 armed men climbed down. A lawyer followed, adjusting his coat to avoid the mud. Then her father emerged. Richard Whitmore looked untouched by the journey. His suit was crisp, his boots clean. He stared at Eleanor like she was a mistake that refused to correct itself. "Climb in," he said. "This is over." "No," Eleanor replied. He laughed softly. "Don't be dramatic. I'm not coming home." He turned to Daniel. "You kidnapped my daughter." "She came here on her own," Daniel said evenly. "I'll see you hanged for this." "You won't," Eleanor said, "because it isn't true." Her father's face hardened. "I'll disinherit you." "Good," she said. "I never wanted your money." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Miss Whitmore is of legal age, sir. We have no legal grounds." "I don't care about grounds," her father snapped. "She's my daughter." Eleanor stepped forward. "I was your property. There's a difference." People had gathered along the road. Neighbors, curious, quiet. An old man with white hair stepped out from the group. "Moses," Daniel murmured. "Seems to me," Moses said calmly, "the lady's made her choice." Her father looked around, at the town, at Daniel standing beside her, at Eleanor, who didn't flinch. "You'll regret this," he said. "The only regret I have," Eleanor answered, steady and clear, "is not leaving sooner." He climbed back into the carriage. "You're no longer my daughter." "I never was," she said. "Daughters are loved." The carriage rolled away. Eleanor felt lighter than she ever had. Daniel turned to her. "You sure?" Quote, "Yes." They stood there as the town slowly dispersed. Moses tipped his hat. "Welcome to the territory," he said. "Just Eleanor," she replied. Daniel hesitated, then took her hand. She squeezed back. Late spring turned the land gold. Wildflowers dotted the hills. Eleanor planted a small garden beside the cabin. Daniel built furniture to sell in town. They worked together now. No distance, no walls. One morning, Moses stopped by. "When are you 2 marrying?" he asked. Eleanor blushed. Daniel almost smiled. They married at sunrise. No grand ceremony, just vows on the porch. A few neighbors, Moses standing between them. Eleanor wore a dress she'd sewn herself. Daniel wore his cleanest shirt. When Moses said, "You may kiss your bride," Daniel hesitated only a moment. Then he cupped her face and kissed her softly. Hope tasted like coffee and morning air. Weeks later, Daniel took her into the hills, to the clearing where he'd found her 2 years ago. Snow would have buried it then. Now it bloomed. "I didn't know who you were that night," he said. "Just knew you were worth saving." She leaned into him. "You taught me something. Worth isn't what you're born into. It's what you build." "Then let's keep building." They walked back hand in hand. That evening, children from town visited. Eleanor taught them to read. Daniel carved toys. Laughter filled the yard. As the sun dipped low, Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder. "Think we'll ever get bored?" she asked. Daniel smiled. A real one. Not a chance. The ranch was quiet. The cabin was whole. For the first time in her life, Eleanor was home. Summer settled in slow and steady, the way good things do when no one's watching. The ranch changed color. Greens deepened. Gold spread across the hills. The creek ran clear again, no longer angry with melt. Eleanor woke each morning to birdsong instead of bells and rules. She worked beside Daniel until sweat soaked her collar and her hands felt strong, sure of themselves. They learned each other in small ways. How he took his coffee black. How she hummed without knowing it when she read. How silence didn't scare either of them anymore. In the evenings they sat on the porch and watched the lights slide off the land. Sometimes they talked. Often they didn't. Both felt like honesty. One night, Daniel spoke into the quiet. "I still get angry," he said. "At you." "At myself." Eleanor nodded. "I know." "You didn't just lie," he went on. "You took my choice away." "I did," she said. "And I can't undo it." He stared out at the hills. "But you stayed when you could have run." "I ran my whole life," she said softly. "Staying is the hardest thing I've ever done." Quote, that earned a small nod. Not forgiveness, but movement. They went into town together for the first time in July. Eleanor felt eyes on her as they walked the dusty street. Curious. Measuring. She kept her chin level. Daniel walked close without touching. That mattered. Moses waved them over outside the general store. "Furniture selling," he said to Daniel. "Word spreading." Daniel glanced at Eleanor. "Her idea." Moses smiled. "Seems like you're good for each other." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. Daniel cleared his throat. On the way back, a man tipped his hat to Eleanor. "Afternoon, Mrs. Mercer." She froze. Daniel did too. The man stammered. "Sorry." Just assumed. Daniel looked at her. A question. Gentle. Real. That night, she lay awake listening to the crickets. The word stayed with her. "Mrs." It didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a door. The first argument came late. It was about nothing. About a fence line Daniel wanted to redo, and Eleanor thought could wait. Voices rose. Old habits surfaced. She heard her father's sharpness in her own tone and hated it. Daniel went quiet. Too quiet. "I'm not him," he said finally. She flinched. "I know." "Then don't talk to me like I am." Shame burned. "I'm sorry." He watched her a long moment. "You're learning," he said. "So am I." They fixed the fence together the next day. In August, a letter arrived. Eleanor recognized the seal before Daniel handed it to her. Her father's crest pressed into wax. Her stomach tightened. "You don't have to read it," Daniel said. "I do." She opened it with steady hands. It wasn't an apology. It was a warning. He wrote of ruined prospects, of scandal whispered in proper rooms, of men who wouldn't forget a fortune turned down. He ended with a line that made her breath catch. "You belong to a world you can't escape." She folded the letter and fed it to the fire. "Any regrets?" Daniel asked. She shook her head. "Only that I waited so long." The drought came quietly. Grass thinned. The creek dropped. Daniel worked longer hours. Eleanor rationed water. They spoke less, not from distance, but from focus. One afternoon, Daniel didn't come back from the north pasture. The sun dipped. Shadows stretched. Eleanor saddled a horse and rode out, heart pounding. She found him near the ravine. Horse limping. Daniel crouched beside it, jaw tight. "Thrown shoe," he said. "Didn't want to push her. You should have sent word." He shrugged. "Didn't want to worry you." She swallowed her anger. Too late. They worked together until the horse was settled. On the ride back, Eleanor watched Daniel's shoulders, the set of them, the weight he carried. "You don't have to do everything alone," she said. He didn't answer. That night, thunder rolled over the hills. Eleanor woke to rain hammering the roof. She stepped onto the porch. The sky split with light. Wind tore at the canvas on the old barn. Then she heard it. A crack. Sharp. Final. She ran. The barn's east beam had given way. Part of the roof sagged under the weight of water. Daniel was already there, wrestling with a post. "Get back!" he shouted. "I won't." They fought the storm together, hammering, bracing, mud up to their ankles. The beam held, just. When it was over, they stood soaked and shaking. Daniel laughed, breathless, uncontrolled. Eleanor laughed too, tears mixing with rain. He pulled her close, held her like the world might take her back if he let go. "I almost lost you once," he said into her hair. "I won't do it again." She pressed her face to his chest. "I'm not going anywhere." The next morning, a rider appeared on the road, different from before, younger. Nervous. He handed Daniel a note. Town seal. Sheriff's mark. Daniel read it. His face tightened. "What is it?" Eleanor asked. "There's been trouble," he said. "Back east. Your father's company." Her heart thudded. What kind of trouble? He folded the note, met her eyes. The kind that doesn't stay put. The wind shifted across the ranch, carrying dust and heat. Eleanor felt it then. The past hadn't finished with her yet. And whatever was coming would test more than truth. It would test what they were willing to lose. The trouble came faster than Eleanor expected. 3 days after the note arrived, another rider appeared. This one wore a city coat ill-suited for dust and heat. He carried papers in a leather satchel, and a look that had learned how to threaten without raising its voice. Daniel met him at the edge of the drive. "I'm here on business," the man said, "regarding Richard Whitmore." Eleanor stepped out beside Daniel. She didn't hide. The man glanced at her, then back to Daniel. "Mr. Whitmore's holdings are collapsing, rail contracts pulled, banks tightening. There are questions and blame." Eleanor felt a strange calm settle over her. "He's trying to drag me back," she said. The man nodded. "He believes a public reconciliation might steady things. Appearances matter." Daniel's jaw set. She's not for show. "I don't belong to him," Eleanor said, "and I won't be paraded to save his reputation." The man studied her, then sighed. "Then I'll tell him the truth." "What truth?" Daniel asked. "That the daughter he tried to control is the one thing he can't buy back." The rider left without another word. Eleanor's knees went weak. Daniel caught her elbow. "You all right?" She nodded. I think that chapter's finally closing." The letter came a week later. No seal, no crest, just her father's handwriting, thinner than she remembered. He wrote of losses, of silence from old friends, of a house too large for one man. He did not apologize. He did not ask forgiveness. He ended with a single line. "You chose your life." I hope it was worth the cost. Eleanor folded the letter and set it aside. Daniel watched her. Was it? Quote, she looked out over the land, the garden thriving, the barn standing strong, the cabin warm with light and use. "Yes," she said, "every part of it." Autumn came early that year. The hills cooled. Leaves burned red and gold. Daniel and Eleanor worked from dawn to dusk, storing hay, repairing fences, preparing for winter. One evening, as they stacked the last of the firewood, Daniel stopped. "You ever think about what you left behind?" he asked. She considered the question carefully. "I think about who I was," she said, "and I'm grateful she didn't stay." Quote. He nodded. "Me too." They sat on the porch wrapped in blankets as the first frost crept in. Eleanor rested her head against his shoulder. The quiet felt earned. Later that night, Daniel reached under the bed and pulled out a small box. "I'm not much for speeches," he said, "but I don't want another winter without knowing you're choosing this, choosing me." He opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, plain, honest. Eleanor's breath caught. "Yes," she said before he could finish. He smiled then. Not careful, not guarded, just real. They married before the first snow. The whole town came. Moses stood proudly at the front. Children crowded close. whispering and giggling. Eleanor wore a dress she'd sewn from sturdy white cloth. Daniel wore his father's old jacket, mended at the elbows. When they spoke their vows, neither raised their voice. They didn't need to. The wind carried the words just fine. Winter returned, hard but fair. They faced it together. Some nights, Eleanor still dreamed of the blizzard, of white and fear, and the moment she almost disappeared. She would wake with her heart racing, and Daniel would pull her close without asking why. Some mornings, Daniel still felt the old guilt stir, the weight of what he'd lost before he learned how to hold on again. Eleanor met that silence with patience. They learned that love wasn't loud, it was steady. One afternoon near the end of winter, Daniel took Eleanor back to the clearing in the hills. Snow lay thin on the ground. The place looked smaller now, less frightening. "This is where I found you," he said. She nodded. "I know. I didn't know who you were," he went on. "Didn't care. You were just someone who needed help." She smiled softly. "That was the first time anyone saw me that way." He took her hand. "And it won't be the last." They stood there a long time, letting the cold bite and fade. Spring came again. The land softened. Green pushed through brown. The ranch breathed easier. Children still came by in the afternoons. Eleanor taught them their letters. Daniel carved toys and fixed stools, and smiled more than he used to. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Eleanor leaned against him on the porch. "He saved my life," she said quietly. Daniel kissed the top of her head. "Turned out we saved each other." The wind moved through the grass. The house held. The land waited. It was enough. More than enough. It was home.